Carry On Constitution. Chapter 8.
John and his ship, the USS Constellation, continued on at Ultralight 14 to report the results of their investigation. It would still take several months to reach the fleet. John worried about the time, about David and the Constitution. David, on the other hand, had his hands full. It was very early in the morning when the communicator sounded.
Captain, we have achieved orbit above a planet, the planet in the center of this donut in the radiation cloud.
David jumped up and replied, "Good, Mr. Kiter. Normal operations. Stevens out." Sorge returned to David.
Are you rested, David?
David replied, "Enough for now. How about you? Does this tire you?"
We are pure energy. I don't have a problem with fatigue. But as you or I need to communicate, I will come to you. Otherwise, I used Vinyar.
Was Sorge's answer. David went back to sleep, waiting for his usual time. It was about 0600 hours when Stella woke and began to get ready for the day. Breakfast, waking little Davy, dressing, you know the routine at the beginning of any duty day. As David finished his morning routine, he kissed Stella and little Davy and headed for the bridge. "I'll see you in a few minutes, Lieutenant." He stepped out of the turbo lift.
Captain on the bridge.
Commanded Mr. Kiter. "As you were," replied David. About that time, Larry exited the turbo lift.
Good morning, Captain, Mr. Kiter.
David returned, "Good morning, number 1. Mr. Kiter, have we any sensor readings from that planet?" The burly Centurion replied.
Yes, sir, little to no known radiation, nitrogen, oxygen, atmosphere. No life signs, not even plants or microorganisms. The sea seems dead as well.
About that time, the turbo lift disgorged the day crew, Lieutenant Stevens, and the rest.
All right, folks, standard routine.
Commanded the first officer. David said, "Number 1, you have the con. I will take an away team down to the planet." Larry opened his mouth to replay. But David spoke first. "Larry, I've been in successful communications with Sorge and have a pretty good idea of what to look for. Assemble a team for me. Life science and engineering." David thought a moment, then tapped his comm badge. "Captain O'Reilly, would you accompany me on the away team?"
Aye, aye, sir. I'll meet you in the teleporter room.
O'Reilly replied. David turned to the first officer. "Okay, Larry, take care of our ship. I'm off." David, O'Reilly, and the rest of the team teleported down to the planet's surface. Upon arrival, David directed the various elements of the team to begin their survey. David told O'Reilly to wait a moment while he communicated with Sorge. David asked, "Sorge, where is the transmitter?" He felt Sorge's presence and allowed him to direct him and O'Reilly to the transmitter building. "Sorge, where can we find the technical material on the transmitter?" David asked aloud. David felt an urge to go into one specific room, and in there were filing cabinets. The labels were in a language unknown to David and Captain O'Reilly, but Sorge, again, entered David and read each label for him. David then said the label out loud for O'Reilly to understand. One cabinet label was translated to be schematics. On the various drawers were labels which David and Mr. O'Reilly thought might be the various sub-assemblies of the transmitter. One label they understood to read, pulse generator. O'Reilly opened that drawer, and pulled out a schematic, opened it up on a nearby drafting table. He and David began to examine the schematic, exclaiming, "This is it, look at this, they put in this circuit," O'Reilly said.
I've seen this before. Now, if I can only remember where and when.
"Well, Mr. O'Reilly, if you don't try too hard, it should come to you. Let's examine the transmitter itself." "Relax your brain, my friend," David directed. Sorge directed David to another room, and they began to examine the machine they found there. It only took a few minutes to recognize the pulse generator, the schematic of which they had just studied. Mr. O'Reilly exclaimed,
This is almost identical to the unit I remember. I wish I could remember where I saw it.
David said, "Relax, my friend. It will come to you. We need to get it right, not necessarily fast. Look, we have found a lot. Why don't you teleport back to the ship, relax with Shirley and just be the Constitution's chief engineer? It will come to you." O'Reilly answered.
Aye, aye, Captain. You are probably right. And relaxing with Shirley would be great too.
O'Reilly touched his comm badge.
Constitution, 1 to teleport up.
David watched as Captain O'Reilly faded away in the usual flurry of dust motes. O'Reilly began to materialize on the teleporter pad. He cried out.
Shirley, I remember, I remember.
As the teleport finished, O'Reilly jumped off the pad, ran over to his wife, grabbed her, and swung her around. Shirley smiled at the twirling, but asked,
What did you remember, sweetheart?
I'll tell you all about it later.
touching his comm badge.
Captain, I remember, it was in R&D.
Touching his comm badge, David ordered, teleport me up. Shirley touched the controls, and David appeared on the teleporter pad. He jumped down and stepped over to where his chief engineer stood. Well, O'Reilly, what is it? O'Reilly excitedly started out of the teleporter room.
Let's go get a drink, Captain. I'll tell you when we can sit and relax.
David and O'Reilly went to the O'Reilly's quarters, where O'Reilly poured out 2 fingers of fine scotch each. O'Reilly, what did you remember? O'Reilly replied.
Captain, do you remember when you demanded that we find a way to teleport around things like ion storms?
David nodded. O'Reilly continued.
I was once detailed to a research project in R&D to find that very thing. The circuit we found down there is exactly like one we tried there in R&D.
David looked intently at his friend. What did you find out about it? O'Reilly replied.
It didn't work as far as our project was concerned, but it killed everything within 200 feet.
David said. Go on, Captain O'Reilly. O'Reilly went on.
We reversed the polarity of one major circuit, and every dead thing returned to life.
David's eyes flew open wide. You mean to tell me, O'Reilly, that we have the answer right here, right now? O'Reilly smiled.
Aye, Captain, that we do.
Captain O'Reilly, David began, do you remember exactly what you did to reverse the polarity of the circuit? O'Reilly replied.
Aye, sir. That I do.
Mr. O'Reilly, write it down right now, just in case something happens, David said.
Aye, Captain.
O'Reilly replied. And he began to draw out the schematic right then. O'Reilly, when you get that done, put it in the computer before you do anything else, David commanded. I'll see you in a bit, have fun, my friend. O'Reilly was too engrossed to reply, which was just fine with David. David went directly to his ready room to think. Sorge came to him and asked what was going on. David told him everything he knew up to that point.
Oh, Captain, there we hope.
Sorge asked. David replied, I don't know. Your planet's life has been separated from their physical being so long. It seems that Captain O'Reilly was able to reverse the effect, but the time was much shorter. David went on, there is a chance, but we have no knowledge, no experience with situations like yours. We can only pray, think, and try. I would tell your people to be alert, get close to your body, and see what happens. I will have our doctors examine your bodies to see if life is still possible. David tapped his comm badge. Dr. Mtao, this is the captain. The doctor replied.
Yes, Captain, what can I do for you?
David went on, Doctor, we need to examine a selection of the bodies on the planet below, to see if life can be restored. I think the bodies might be too dehydrated. But you might be able to help us determine if life is possible. The doctor replied.
Yes, Captain, we will do just as you suggest. I will send a team down to select several bodies to be teleported up for examination now with your permission.
David replied, Okay, get on it and let me know your conclusions. About that time, the door signal sounded. David commanded, Enter. Captain O'Reilly walked in.
Captain, here is the answer.
Handing David the schematic. Great O'Reilly, David continued, what's the fastest way to transmit a message to the Admiral? O'Reilly replied.
Subspace, Captain. But we can travel faster in the Constitution and outrun the message.
Damn, we can't leave here right now, began David, but we must get the message to the fleet as quickly as possible. O'Reilly replied.
I've been thinking about hyperspace that the Western system uses. I had a chance to examine their technology. I might be able to rig up a device that would transmit in hyperspace. I just don't know if it would be faster than our subspace.
Well, O'Reilly, let's send everything we know about this killer pulse and the antidote both ways, push it to the limit, was David's answer.
Aye, Captain. I'll get my crew on it right away.
With that, O'Reilly left the ready room. As David sat thinking, Sorge came to him.
Captain, I have alerted our people. They will gather near to your bodies when you and Captain O'Reilly are ready to try something.
David replied, "We won't do anything until Dr. M. Tao tells us that it would be possible and practical to revive you." David left his ready room and walked to sickbay. "Well, doctor, what do we know?" Dr. M. Tao replied,
I cannot find anything which would explain the condition of these bodies. They should be dehydrated, but they aren't. I brought up a sampling of plant life, the same thing.
O'Reilly called the captain.
Captain, I have the transceivers ready. If you come to engineering, we're ready to transmit your message.
David replied, "I'll be right there." David had prepared the message in Morse code, system standard, and plain text. He took the lift to engineering and saw the engineering crew all waiting to send his message. "Here it is, Captain O'Reilly. Morse code, system standard, and plain text. Let's do it," O'Reilly said.
Aye, aye, Captain. All right, people, send the message.
David asked, "Captain O'Reilly, can we send the message every hour for the next full day? 24 copies might make it,"
Aye, aye, Captain.
responded O'Reilly. O'Reilly pulled David aside.
Captain, why are you so formal?
David responded, "I don't understand. What do you mean formal?"
Always calling me Captain O'Reilly, sir.
O'Reilly replied. David understood. "I call you captain, here before your crew, because, in an official setting, you deserve the respect of those around you. O'Reilly, we're friends, I hope, and I respect you. I want to convey that respect to your crew. That's why, here, I address you as Captain O'Reilly."
Captain, that is the same kind of answer the Admiral would have given me. Thank you, sir.
Mr. O'Reilly replied. David looked at his chief engineer, Captain O'Reilly. "Dr. Mtao cannot find out why the bodies are not walking around. They are not dehydrated, and he can't figure out why. I would say that we should try to reanimate some. We could start with a plant. Are you ready?" The engineer replied.
Aye, I have to build a modified circuit. We can only try. Just ask the good doctor to send us some plants.
A few hours later, O'Reilly called David.
Captain, we are ready, waiting for your word.
David replied, "Okay, O'Reilly, do it and let me know the results." O'Reilly's excited voice came over the comm.
Captain, we seem to have life in these plants. I've got life sciences here, and they assure me that the plants are now alive. Dr. Mtao is ready to try an animal, something like a dog. I'll let you know.
Excited, David said, "Okay, Captain O'Reilly. Do it." O'Reilly's voice came over the comm.
Captain, we have a problem.
David was shocked. "What's the problem?" O'Reilly's voice had a smile in it.
We got a dog running all around engineering. I've never seen such a happy animal like this one.
Elated, David replied, "Do a person."
Aye, aye, sir.
Came O'Reilly's excited reply. After a few moments, O'Reilly called David.
Captain, you're going to have a visitor. I'll escort her to your ready room.
A few moments later, David's annunciator sounded, "Come." Was David's reply. The door opened, and Captain O'Reilly and a stunning young lady stepped in. O'Reilly said,
Captain, I would like you to meet Sword.
David took a second look. "You're the one who has been in my head." Sorge replied,
Yes, Captain, I came to thank you. Oh, and don't worry, I won't tell Anjona secrets.
"Thank you, Sorge, Captain O'Reilly. It's time to revive the whole planet and hopefully restore the dead worlds we have seen." David replied. A simple matter of modifying the circuit that had been identified and keying the transmitter. The life of the planet was restored. There were many celebrations. The planet's governments wished to honor the men and women of the Constitution. David made it as clear as he could that the combined fleet of the two systems was as responsible for their restoration. Still, the Planetary Council honored the Constitution's crew with a commendation medal. At the end of the week, the planetary population and the crew of the Constitution we exhausted. David, Stella, and little Davy were relaxing that evening, reading an old Disney picture book, Cinderella, when there came a call from Captain O'Reilly.
Captain, we have a reply to your message over the hyperspace transceiver.
"Well, it looks like we have really done a lot of things this mission. What's the message say, or is it too long and technical?"
No, sir, all it says is, good job. Rejoin the fleet. Holoran.
David replied, "Well, O'Reilly, we're going home." David tapped his comm badge. "Bridge, ship wide, please." "Ship wide, aye, sir." "All hands, this is the captain. Admiral Halloran has ordered us to return to the fleet. We will push Captain O'Reilly's engines to the max. All hands, we will depart at 0600 hours tomorrow. Captain out." Captain O'Reilly contacted Sorge.
Miss, we have been ordered to return to our fleet. We will be leaving in 10 hours.
She began to cry.
Oh, O'Reilly, so son. I know orders are orders. God bless you and all your people. Please thank David, Captain Stevens, for me and my world. Goodbye.
The next morning, 0600 hours, and all personnel were on station. David commanded, "Helm, take us back the way we came. It's safe as long as we are alert to the radiation. All stations monitor for radiation. Ahead Ultralight 1, energize." David asked the monitor be set on the retreating planet. What they saw was a planet, green, brown, and blue, and a huge crowd below, which upon magnification were waving goodbye. Then fireworks were shot off, the likes of which no one on the ship had ever seen. David thought he heard Sorge's voice.
Wither Tope, thank you, Captains David and O'Reilly.
David tapped his comm badge. "Captain O'Reilly, my ready room please. Oh, and bring your lieutenant." Over the comm,
Aye, aye, Captain.
Captain O'Reilly and his lieutenant, Commander Hardwick, entered the ready room and addressed the captain.
Reporting as directed, sir.
David replied, "Sit, gentlemen. George, it's good to see you. Captain O'Reilly, you have the modified circuit, right?" O'Reilly smiled.
Aye, that we do.
David frowned. "The death pulse is still racing at light speed throughout the galaxy. We need a way to stop it. You two and your crew are best able to find a way. It's going to be 3 months or so before we get to the fleet. Please, do whatever you can to discover a way to stop the death pulse." George replied.
"We've already started, Captain."
O'Reilly answered.
I have talked it over with our crew, and they have responded with some possible solutions. We'll be working on them as we can. We will keep up our routine maintenance on this old lady we call home. Every member of the crew has volunteered several extra hours a week to this project.
David sighed. "O'Reilly, George, I knew you and your crew would come through. If there is some non-technical work non-engineering people can do, coordinate with the section chiefs. I'll alert them to the possibility of your need." "O'Reilly, George, thank you," David continued. "By the way, as we were leaving, I thought I heard Sorge's voice in my head again, saying,
Wither Tope, thank you, Captains David and O'Reilly. Thank you, Captain O'Reilly."
O'Reilly replied,
Tell the lady it was my pleasure if you can. Good afternoon, Captain.
O'Reilly and George left to return to engineering. David ordered that they push the Constitution to maximum speed. Captain O'Reilly was not too happy, but they pushed their engines to ultralight 16. Engineering doubled on-duty staff, which stretched their resources to the maximum. David called his first officer, Larry, "Give me a list of individuals who are not presently assigned to engineering, which have engineering experience." Larry responded,
Aye, aye, sir. You'll have it in an hour.
An hour later and Larry entered the captain's ready room and handed David a palm pad.
Everyone with engineering experience. I've also noted how much and in what capacity they have served.
David stood up, took the palm pad, and left the ready room, going down to see Captain O'Reilly. David arrived in engineering to see a tired man sitting at a console, head nodding, eyes closed. David touched O'Reilly's shoulder. "O'Reilly?" O'Reilly snapped to awareness.
Captain?
David handed O'Reilly the palm pad. "Here is a list of everyone with any engineering experience. Choose the ones you believe would do you the most good to ease the situation here. Give me the list, and we'll make the temporary reassignments. Okay?" O'Reilly brightened.
Aye, aye, Captain. You'll have your list in about an hour.
David, "Oh, by the way, O'Reilly, keep the death pulse problem in mind as you go over that list." O'Reilly replied,
Aye, sir.